Welcome to this week's End of Days Update, coming to you from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had such a great time last week at Grand Junction, Colorado at Faith Heights Church. Folks were so hungry. It's so fun to see people all over the country and all over the world excited about the coming of the Lord. How cool we get to see Jesus so soon. So if you're anywhere near Alma, Arkansas this weekend, we'll be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Monday night, getting into end times and the power of God. We'll have a great time. Enjoy going to that church as well. Wonderful folks. Man, we're coming to you every week to look at the different things that point to the coming of the Lord, specifically the gathering of nations for the Ezekiel 38 war, because the rapture of the church is signless. The second coming has tons of signs. And stuff keeps happening every single week that we don't get a lot of info here in the States. But man, this last week, there's so much happening that I'll try to slow down and go through it. But it's super complex, but it's super boldly points to the entrance of the King. So my goodness, we're about to see Jesus face to face. So let's pick up with the first thing that happened. We'll start with Iran. Man, Iran's... and the U.S. and other parties are trying to come together for a new nuclear deal. But in the midst of that, Iran fired a missile. Remember last week I talked about, they said they're going to fire a missile at Israel's nuclear site. They fired a missile from Damascus down into southern Israel by the Dimona nuclear site. The villages all around Dimona were rocking with explosions. This came from Syria, Iran fired it from Syria. And the Israeli Defense Forces are kind of freaking out that these missiles were able to bypass 5 different shields, and that missile came down and almost hit Israel's nuclear site there. So absolutely crazy. Of course, the night before that, Israel had done a raid just outside of Damascus, took out some missiles that were coming from Iran down into Syria to get to Hezbollah. So Israel's had to do so many of those to stop Iran from basically building up enough ammunition to annihilate Israel. So in the midst of that, Israel went back and did more airstrikes at that spot where that missile came from. So a lot's happening. Right after that, you had a missile from an Israeli drone hit an Iranian ship in the area out by the Red Sea. So it's like you got going back and forth, more stuff even happening, because it came out from the Israeli Defense Forces now that Iran is literally 3 to 4 months away from a nuclear breakout. So they even showed a picture of the steel line tank that they're using to do basically explode atomic weapons there in Iran. So crazy. Now all that technology came from North Korea, but it looks like they're way closer to getting a nuclear weapon than everyone thought. I said it a couple times, and I'm just using conjecture, which I don't normally do, but the Bible says in Isaiah 17:1 that Damascus will be removed from being a city. So I believe Iran's going to try to sneak a nuclear weapon down into Damascus to fire into Israel, and somehow it's going to self-detonate because they don't know what they're doing. It's going to wipe Damascus off the map. But you see them trying to do that by firing a missile from Damascus this last week. So there's so much more connected to that, along with, you had Israel's Mossad chief, you had the Israeli Defense Force general come to the U.S. in the last couple of days. So Israel's huge delegations there to figure out what to do about the Iranian nuclear program. So a lot's going to happen here in the next few days about that as well. But in the midst of that, this is bizarre. You have basically another rise up or an intifada from the Palestinians. This last Friday night, you had a barrage of rockets coming from Gaza into southern Israel, exploding all over the place. The Iron Dome caught some of them, but they had 35 rockets on Friday night. In the midst of that, you had rioting all over Jerusalem. You have Palestinians coming against Israelis, and what they're doing is they're trying to stop the Palestinians' elections so that Fatah can't beat Hamas. So there's so much happening. In the middle of all of that, you had the Palestinians chanting, "We will use our blood to redeem the Temple Mount." A lot happened over the Temple Mount because there were rumors that the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia was going to be chosen instead of Jordan to basically oversee the Temple Mount. So people started freaking out, thinking that Saudi Arabia is going to be basically be the custodians of the Temple Mount. Remember, everything's going to revolve around that piece of real estate. Remember, Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling for all nations. So you're watching the setup for that. And just in the last couple of days, it's the first time in months that the Palestinians fired incendiary balloons into southern Israel. So the security cabinet for Israel okayed basically an incursion into Gaza. And Israel's taken tanks, been firing tanks at those spots, and Israeli airstrikes at those spots. So Israel's getting it from two sides. They're getting it from the southern part of Israel, from Gaza. They're getting fired at from the northern part in Syria. And then along with that, you've got Russia still having 150,000 troops on its border. So a lot of things are heating up as far as that goes. Now that came out this last week, there are several space agencies that are coming up with ways to try to knock asteroids out of the skies. So there's 3 or 4 different ones that came out this last week because asteroids are coming so close to the Earth. Along with the different earthquakes that are happening, along with that, you've got locusts up in Lebanon. You had a huge, massive outbreak. So many more things keep happening that are pointing to Jesus is about to come back. But man, the buildup with Iran, the buildup with Turkey, haven't even talked about Turkey's freaked out over America calling their Armenian genocide in 1915. So with that, they could kick our fighters out of there. We have bases there in Turkey. So it makes their alliance with Russia and Syria and Iran even stronger. So why is that? That's the group that comes down on Israel in the Ezekiel 38 war. So wow, it's all being set up right in front of our eyes. Well, what do? We always go to the scripture every week. We look at the Bible for the signs. Number 1, Israel made a nation. Number 2, Jerusalem won back. Jesus said the generation that sees those 2 events won't pass away till all is fulfilled. But then you got the Hebrew language restored. You got the Ethiopian Jews brought back. You got the fertility of the land of Israel. You have the revival of the Roman Empire. You have the Temple Mount Institute that's ready to start having sacrifices. Wow, it's amazing to see what all they've got ready for that. After that, you've got 172 different species of predatory birds. So you've got birds in position for the Ezekiel 38 war, birds in position for the Battle of Armageddon. And then you had fish show up in the Dead Sea. That was prophesied 2,700 years ago. You had foxes show up on the Temple Mount. England's getting excited about that. You had foxes show up on the Temple Mount. Amazing. You had the ritual baths around the Temple Mount fill up with water. You had the Sea of Galilee overflow with water. I mean, the rabbis are like the Messiah is about to come. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. You have the triumphant arch where the temple Baal worship was instigated in Palmyra, Syria, rebuilt a couple of weeks ago. Started to by the Russians. And the Talmud says when you see that, the Messiah is about to come. That's the last thing they said that you had to see. So many things are happening. Along with all the signs of the coming of the Lord, you got signals. I do like this one. One of the signs is men will be lovers themselves. We have selfie sticks. So sign after sign after sign after sign pointing to the coming of the Lord. Why would that be a big deal? Jesus wants us to have a heads up. He wants us to know how close it is. So it's not an escape theology, it's a hustle theology. And we get into all this stuff because He loves us so much. He wants to bless you, He wants to strengthen you, He wants to encourage you, He wants you to accelerate to do the will of God right before the coming of the Lord. So you have all those signs, many, many more. It's hard to get into all of them, but then you've got signals. You got blood red moons on Passover and Tabernacles a few years ago. You had 4 in a row, and that's radical. NASA calls that a tetrad. And when's the last time you had that? 4 in a row on Passover and Tabernacles. 1967 when Jerusalem was won back. 1948 when Israel was made a nation. 1492 at the Edict of Expulsion when the Jews were kicked out of Spain. So remarkable that you have those things coinciding with things happening with the Jews. So amazing. Then this last year you had the Bethlehem Star. England likes that. You had the Bethlehem Star this last year, first time in 2,000 years. Jupiter, Regulus, Venus. Amazing. So all these things are pointing to His return, and it's just the thought pattern for the church has to be we get more engaged. What do? Help our local church, help our local pastor, because this is it. I heard people go, now these signs have all happened before. No, they've never happened before. And when you have the strategic nations aligned against Israel that are going to in the Ezekiel 38 war, and they're set up for that right now, wow, we're about to see Jesus. So let's accelerate. Let's do the will of God. I had one guy tell me, he said, Joe, if you preach on the coming of the Lord, just get everybody's hopes up. Duh, that's right. It's the hope that purifies us even as we're pure. So even with England coming into the picture here, we know we're about to see the King. Make changes in your life. Get excited. Do the will of God. Be engaged with the King, because we're about to see His eyes as a flame of fire, feet like undefined brass, voice of many waters. Jesus, the one who died for us, raised from the dead, coming so soon. Have a blessed, awesome week. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thanks Thanks for joining us today at the End of Days Update. If you'd like to be notified every time there's a new post, just go to the EDU at josephmorris.com and subscribe to receive email alerts. If these posts and updates have been a blessing to you, please consider making a one-time donation to help get the message out, or even becoming a monthly partner with Joseph Morris Ministries. Thanks again for tuning in to the EDU, and we'll see you next week.